Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame, automate the hunt. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
And we're back just to talk about the news stories of the week. Boom! Take it away, Paul.
I think we have to start with Hotlanta.
Hotlanta!
And Hotlanta has been a hotbed of hacker activity.
It's been
apparently.
a hot mess. It's been a hot mess.
A hot mess. I like how your story said Hotlanta.
Yeah, well,
I hadn't heard the Hotlanta term in some time. Early days of pen testing, spent some time in Atlanta. Hotlanta.
Yeah, and back in the day, the world's #1 most famous hacker was from Hotlanta.
I had some good friends in Hotlanta. Robert Graham and Dave Maynard, were they both in Atlanta?
I think so.
My good friend Dave, who I worked with.
Dave's not here, man.
Dave's not here, man. Well, he's not anymore. He's in
Hotlanta.
He was in Atlanta last time I talked to him. He was doing a contract when I worked at Brown University. And those that remember like the days way back early in the show, our good friend Mason.
Oh,
who I met
man.
at a SANS event. I met some really interesting characters at a SANS event once.
He was the one that had to get servers and rented a convertible and loaded up the convertible full of servers and servers.
Dude, Mason was crazy. He was the Security Weekly host for a very short time, way back in the early days of the show.
I'd love to find out what happened to him and have him back on a segment.
You wonder what? I haven't talked to him in probably 10 plus years.
Yeah, we need Mason.
But he lived in Atlanta.
Mason.
If you're listening, Mason,
we need to have you on and see what
we used to call him the Mason. That's what we used to call him. Yeah.
Speaking of,
I mean, there are a number of talented people in Atlanta. There's Jerry Bell and Andrew Callett.
Why are we just seeing Keith's mouth? There we go.
There's also my friend Forensics Kendra. So she's also there working for MailChimp. Like there's a lot of really good people in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
so the town of Atlanta, or the city of Atlanta, I should say, has been hacked.
Yes.
Apparently pretty bad. The reports that I've seen have ranged from airport Wi-Fi has been disabled.
Yep. Some potential airport systems which they've resolved.
It seems like anything that had been ransomwared, they don't know what to do with. Things that haven't been ransomware, they told their employees to basically unplug their systems. I also know from previous experiences that Atlanta has, I forget what they call it, but a transit system.
Yes.
In Atlanta that I'm.
And my understanding was that there was something affected with their transit system, but was allegedly unrelated.
Interesting.
Allegedly unrelated.
Because Atlanta, for those of you that live in Atlanta or have visited, know that traffic can be a complete nightmare.
Especially with the collapse of that one particular set of highway that is, my understanding, still not repaired.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
My understanding is that it is near completion. But
and I remember folks trying to rely on the I call it mass transit, but the transit system in Atlanta. I forget what it's called. But it was very limited as to where you could go in Atlanta, hence some of the traffic problems they had in Atlanta. You know, certainly being in Rhode Island and having to commute into Boston to support various events or visit people, I get the traffic issue, right?
Oh, yeah.
But Atlanta has that probably times 5 or 10
right.
From Boston.
And exploded as a tech community and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, the big one, I think, this very much goes back to one of the stories that we covered many years ago, was that some hackers had compromised a distribution point and were using it for wares and such. But they could have done so much more because it was literally the distribution for like Logitech drivers for every Logitech product on the planet. And if they had been able to intersperse their malware into those drivers, they could have done so much more. But no, they were just distributing wares.
But it's interesting that working in security as long as we have, we've heard stories about how hackers have basically been able to influence traffic lights, have been able to influence any kind of parking meters, have been able to break into cities' infrastructure and do various things. I think one of the more recent interesting stories was, I believe it was in Washington State, where marijuana is legal.
Yep.
The state maintains a database of who is transporting marijuana, what their origin is, and what their destination is.
Yeah, we talked about that.
And even how much they're carrying. So the attackers broke into that site.
Yeah.
So attacking municipalities has become somewhat of a theme. I think some of it has been for fun in years past. Now it's very much focused on profit.
Yep.
In this case, they were asking for $55,000 US in the equivalent Bitcoin.
My understanding was Ethereum.
Okay.
But either way, some sort of cryptocurrency. And my understand, the way I see this is that the hackers were able to gain control of these systems, put ransomware on them, and effectively were able to shut down a number of these fairly critical systems to the city of Atlanta.
The other story I read was a parking pass for the airport where they log on online to get their receipt. That was down as well.
So some fairly critical stuff.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, they're asking for $51,000 US.
Okay.
I don't think they realize how much they have the city of Atlanta by the balls.
Yeah.
And they don't realize what they have. They could have asked for a lot more. And
in that vein, maybe
$51,000 to $55,000 is what they asked for. And I think this is one of those things that repeating that you don't really know what you got. And as an attacker, I want to know what I've got and what that really means to someone, so that I can, when I know that I've got them by the balls, I can demand to know them by the balls.
I haven't seen anything that says they've paid that though.
Exactly.
So my understanding is they haven't paid it, but also that this is a group that has in the past targeted very specific malware and ransomware attacks against such municipalities and things of that nature for the reason of expecting payment. So I wonder if they're pricing it out at $55,000 because that's considered a reasonable payment.
Yeah. And you know what?
How many cities exist in the U.S. today that would be willing to pay around $50,000 if you're a criminal that is using the internet and hacking methods to basically put ransomware on these municipalities in the United States? Larger cities may be willing to pay that $50,000. Let's say you compromise 10 of those and half of them pay, and you've done all that in a couple of months worth of work. That's a pretty good payout for you. I think the amount is on point.
Agreed. And me not knowing the entire situation, admittedly, me thinking about the city of Atlanta and having to pay out $51,000 to $55,000 to quote solve the problem, versus the reports that I've heard say that they have Microsoft and Cisco in to help them solve the problem. How much are they paying Microsoft and or Cisco to have them solve the problem? I suspect it's more than $51,000.
How much does it cost?
Ultimately,
if they pay the ransom,
ultimately that doesn't solve the root cause.
No.
That said,
if they pay
could probably get away with $51,000 to pay the ransomware off, and whatever they're paying to Microsoft and Cisco to help them fix some of the root cause. And arguably some of the root cause is just being fucking dumb.
Common sense. Criminals are demanding $50,000.
Yeah.
What's to say that you pay that $50,000 and they don't give you anything?
Right. We don't negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah. So they could just take their $50,000 and go off and run away.
I think criminals are pretty honorable.
There's no honor. There's no honor amongst thieves.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There just isn't. There just isn't. I think this is really underscoring the level of urgency that is being put upon now municipalities to secure their infrastructure. You don't want to be any kind of organization in any kind of industry that's a low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals that are using ransomware. You just don't. You don't want to be there.
I think this goes so much deeper in the discussion that the city of Atlanta has had is that they are very invested in IT cybersecurity. Yet, you go and look at the rendition sec blog of some of the the scanning that they had done and looking at what they had found was that they had the city of Atlanta had for months systems connected to the internet. City of Atlanta known systems as part of their alleged infrastructure in their IP space, unpatched for Microsoft released critical vulnerabilities RCE that was exploitable. Subsequent scans showed that the exploit had happened and that exploit was active and was, quote, pingable, that systems had been exploited for over a year.
Mm-hmm.
And these systems then are, in that exploit case, are often used to install ransomware.
Rob Shane said something interesting earlier on the show. He said, the business stakeholders look at business risk as very high, but security risk is very low. I think this is an example where security risks and business risks are the same thing. And if you're not, and I think nothing underscores this point better than when Keith and I were talking about the Phoenix Project and how a business operates. All of your risks are risks, whether those are security related, whether those are process related, whether those are audit related, whatever the risk is, it's a risk to the business. And I think so many businesses, whether you're a city, which is a business, that look at risk as, well, we're just looking at the business risk, and security as well, that's someone else's problem, have to consider this as a business risk. And this incident in Atlanta, to a certain extent Baltimore, which has some kind of 911 incident, which I think was, from what I've read, unrelated, have to look at all of these risks as business related.
But I think there are different layers of business related risk in that internet facing systems versus internal should have some different risk ratings applied to them.
I don't think so. I think business risk needs to be classified as a risk to the business, and whether or not it's internet facing or not is somewhat irrelevant, because as we've seen, that the perimeter is no longer the perimeter anymore. It's not just about internet facing.
But still, there is
relevant. It may not be as relevant as days past. But irrelevant.
It may not.
It's kind of a strong term.
Thanks, Jeff. And think about this: the stuff that Rendition Security found was that the City of Atlanta had systems on their network, internet facing, unpatched for Microsoft critical stuff for 60 days.
So I have a quick question about that.
Go ahead.
So what sort of systems are they actually citing? Is it, criminal systems? Is it tax systems? Have they cited anything specifically as to what's being affected here in terms of maybe parking fines and things of like that nature?
So the ones that Rendition pointed out were based on reverse PTR records, some of which were incorrect. If 5 of them resolved reverse PTR records for cityofAtlantaGA.com. Who knows? One of them was a webmail based system. Danger, Will Robinson. And then there was one other with some name I didn't recognize. If you have my thing is, if Microsoft releases a critical patch that you need to patch this like today, and you let that internet-facing system go for 60 days.
I think the issue is even. But I think that
more likely. Let me interject, Paul. I haven't spoken in a while.
I know you. It's nice to hear your voice, Jeff.
Scenario, and I'm not trying to knock any level of government, but it's more likely that the systems weren't on anybody's inventory, weren't on anybody's radar screen. Systems that need to be patched.
Yeah. But and then thinking about what Rendition InfoSec found was that these systems were serving SMB and RDP to the internet.
Not saying that they didn't serve a function.
They didn't say, exactly, but they just weren't on anybody's radar.
Yep.
As to segue, though, and I think this is a really good point for a segue, is what if they were patched, Larry, but they were patched with bad patches, as in your story number 1?
Well, hold on. I want to go back. I want to go back to this topic of IT risks separate from. I don't think it's separate from. I think that IT needs to be looked at as an integral part of the business.
Yes.
In other words, as even if you're a city or municipality, you are running a business, that IT is very much part of that,
Yes.
that keeping your systems up to date, running and secure and having integrity is part of the mission as your business, that those should be integrated together. These silos that we've created that looks at the business separate from IT, that's separate from security, is an archaic way of thinking in just so many different ways, that so many businesses today need to look at the bigger picture, that all of these systems intertwine. And I want to talk about something that was discussed in the new book by Gene Kim and John Willis, where they have a conversation about the Phoenix Project called Beyond the Phoenix Project. And what they said was that when they looked at Instagram, they found that they were able to grow to millions and millions of users with a very small development team and 1 or 2 systems administrators. And if that doesn't speak to how security should be done today, I don't know what does. And I think at the time when Facebook acquired them for $1 billion, they had, I don't know how many ever hundreds of millions or a billion users, and they still only had a very small team in perspective to developers and system. There were like 25 people when they got acquired. To me, that is the poster child for balancing all of your competencies in terms of technology, development, and IT and business all together to be the most efficient. And I think that it's somewhat like nonprofits need to take a page from that and say, to deliver the service in the most efficient way possible, we need to look at all of these things not as separate entities, not just as, hey, there's a bunch of IT systems that haven't been patched, and maybe that's IT's problem. And yeah, there's a bunch of software that's really out of date, and that's a development problem. And we want to deliver more to our customers, and well, that's a business problem. That they're all
intertwined
problems that are intertwined that can be solved by integrating all of those areas together.
And I think, you know, me thinking about that just critically off the top of my head, that, you know, we have these IT processes that, you know, if you have different levels of systems. If it's an internet connected facing one and you're doing these types of activities, you need to consider this type of risk. I mean, you need to patch the shit out of this thing. Versus one that's internal between a couple of layers of firewalls and so forth. You maybe have a different risk level. And I think all of those intertwined into a business process and defining that business process risk, I think we'd find also different levels of risk based on that business process. Even still, I think we'd find those systems at an elevated level of risk.
So what I'm hearing is context matters.
Oh, hell yeah.
I know that we at BugCrowd look at application security risk from the perspective of a vulnerability rating taxonomy, where we look at the context of the user. Is it an admin or a non-admin, right? To this end, it sounds like, I know that there have been some companies that have recently launched that look at asset management, but the context of the asset really matters in this case. And to that end, they really should be dealing with patching based on that context appropriately.
Well, hello. If you're going to do any kind of a risk assessment, you know, there's multiple variables that go into the equation. So you know, and I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek here, but just looking at the vulnerabilities does not give you a complete picture of your risk.
Absolutely.
Neither does just looking at what your threat landscape looks like, you know, which is more than just the you know, all the things that are out there that could get you, like the malware and whatnot. It's actually, and this is actually, I don't want to digress too much, but one of the big problems I think we have in our industry with regard to threat is not taking into a proper account that threat, at least the way I learned it, is who wants to do something bad to you, who wants to steal something from you, who wants to alter your business, who wants to disrupt your business, who wants to make life difficult for you. We're much more in tune with threats being, how do we stop the malware, how do we stop the phishing attacks, which are largely people just taking pot shots to see at anybody to see who bites, and then see what they can do with it.
But I think that a a lot of the threats that we talk about in our stories of this week boil down to that really the risk is that there's some kind of missing infrastructure patch, which is what you're describing, right? There is a missing patch in Windows in our infrastructure. And what DevOps preaches is that infrastructure is coupled in with development, and everyone's working together such that the infrastructure is not built every time, that infrastructure and code and applications are one unit that gets pushed through the system such that when we deploy something in production, all of the infrastructure support, all of the application support, and all of the development support, all of those pieces are continually pushed out into production as one cohesive unit. It's the blending of code, application, and infrastructure into one cohesive unit that is pushed through the system that allows us to be basically up to date all the time. And I think that's an aspect that and when you study things like I just finished the Phoenix Project and I'm reading Beyond the Phoenix Project, that they derive from manufacturing, and the goal is that one push through the system. And I think that so many organizations haven't embraced that process, that they still look at developers writing code, applications providing the kind of middleware infrastructure for that, and systems administrators providing the OS platform, that if we blend all those things together and we're able to push that as one cohesive unit, that's what I've learned recently, that's what DevOps is really about. And it borrows from other principles that have been taken from lean manufacturing, concepts from manufacturing organizations like Toyota that have really honed in on that.
Toyota Lean and Idle.
In that process, I'm like, wow, that really translates to IT. And when I see these stories now
and it's funny, Paul, that like this is stuff that I've been talking about for 7 or 8 years.
Oh, and a lot of people have been
doing but the funny thing is, you're absolutely right. And from having been in that environment where you've got this whole Toyota Lean Idle process methodology, DevOps, and you've got this push to production. And typically what I see is that you do this whole thing, you push it to production, and production gets it turned over to a whole new set of DevOps processes. It's like, I've given birth to a baby, and now the parents are left to deal with it, and they have this whole new set of DevOps processes. And my thinking is that whole new set of DevOps processes, when it makes it to production, not all of the updates are going to come from operational updates are going to come from the development. It's going to come from those folks that are supporting those systems day to day, where the DevOps folks are working on the next push. And the day-to-day push is like, what's the risk of this system in production, and should we consider these patches because of the classification of the system?
But I think the power of DevOps is that everyone's working together.
Right.
And I turn back to the Equifax example, right, where their application server was solely out of date.
Equifax, I'm going to get another drink.
In a true DevOps environment, that's not an issue. They're doing 10 commits a day, and their ability to develop code and test that code and push it into production is a well-defined process, so that when you upgrade the application server, stuff is getting tested, stuff is getting fixed, and you're constantly pushing forward.
Right.
And I think that's the crux of this conversation for me, is that that's a model that not just large software organizations like Instagram are implementing, but I want to see it permeated all the way out to municipalities like Atlanta that are trying to implement IT. They're trying to implement applications, and they're not taking into account the way that multi-billion-dollar companies are doing this, which are highly successful. And I think that's some of the kind of progression of Gene Kim and a lot of other people's work, is to take that model and push it out, not just for the for-profit, really popular social media companies, but push it down to, can a city like Atlanta adopt these processes such that they're not stuck in this situation where we've got this legacy application that's running on a legacy operating system that people are compromising, and they're putting ransomware on it, and now we're down for weeks on end.
Yep.
If I may,
hold on,
real quick,
Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, Paul, but you're still what you're describing in terms of there's systems out there that aren't being patched. That by definition is a vulnerability, but you referred to it as risk. Yes, you can derive risk, but there's other factors and variables that go into determining what the risk is, and most importantly, whether the risk is to a level that you guys need to do something about it. It's not necessarily patch the vulnerability and you've eliminated the risk, because there's other variables involved. And all I'm trying to say is we too often equate or make synonymous risk and vulnerability without taking into account all the other processes, environmental factors, if you will, which I think is what you're trying to say in terms of this book that you've read and in terms of the work that Gene Kim and others are doing. I think we're all trying to say the same thing. I'm simply boiling it down to what you described as risk is not a risk in and of itself. It's a vulnerability. Before you get to that point where you call it a risk, you need to take into account other factors and variables.
Yeah, and Jeff, I think what you've hit on is how you determine what work should be done in what priority, right? There could be, in your example, right, a vulnerability that's a very low risk, and you have to go through some processes to determine that risk level.
And I want to qualify with some things that you said, but this development process. But once something gets released to production, that's an entirely different, I would argue, entirely different animal, and maybe a completely second set of DevOps type of operations. It's not going to follow the same one. You're developing it in a vacuum, as it were, and in a very complex vacuum. I've read the Phoenix Project. I've read the Goal many years ago, and once it gets to production, it goes there, and you have this continuous roll. But the continuous roll, in many cases, about the application and the development of the application. But what's all the infrastructure that delivers the application? I think many of that gets forgotten.
Infrastructure should be delivered alongside of the application.
It should, but it doesn't.
And I would add, this is actually something we're going to cover probably in some depth tomorrow, actually, in episode 10 of Application Security Weekly, which is the difference between DevOps and DevSecOps, which is the whole idea of what you're talking about, Larry, which is, do you actually address the security concerns of things as they exist in production as part of the DevOps cycle or not? And should you, for that matter?
Yeah, and Paul, I think that's where we differ in our that you're talking DevOps and I may be talking DevSecOps.
I think they're one and the same.
I don't.
No, I don't think so.
And you know what? That's what's great about this country is we get to disagree.
The DevOps handbook actually says very specifically throughout, the DevOps handbook states specifically that the security process is part of DevOps inherently.
Yes.
So technically speaking, Paul, based on the handbook, is basically right. That DevOps is actually part of the process, including infrastructure.
If you want to put your trust in a handbook, go for it. I still disagree.
Fair. And quite frankly, you have every right to.
And quite honestly, I think maybe at this point we're splitting hairs.
Possibly.
So you know what?
We're separating them internally, according to Daniel Miessler.
Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's move on. I think we will agree that we're splitting hairs.
Oh, so let's talk about Facebook.
Oh, fuck no.
My God. There wouldn't be a show on the network this week if we didn't talk about Facebook. We have talked about the FTC investigation. We've talked about Alex Stamos stepping down in his last days at Facebook.
Did we talk about August? I wasn't here last week. Did we talk about Cambridge Analytica?
Cambridge Analytica we've talked about on previous shows this week. What I wanted to take this show to is there was an article that says a systems administrator has released some scripts that says, hey, if you're going to delete your Facebook account, you should check out my script, because I wrote a script that went in history in my Facebook account, made all of my posts, converted them into gibberish. Because you know in Facebook how you can edit a previous post?
Yeah.
My postulation, my theory, rather, is that you could write an API script to Facebook's API, which I'm somewhat familiar with from my internal applications here at Security Weekly. You could write a script that went back into every single one of your Facebook posts, modified the content, and turned it into gibberish.
That could be convenient.
The theory is...
Not that it wasn't gibberish to begin with.
Correct.
Right.
It very well could be gibberish to begin with. I think
The Thanksgiving incident.
it would separate the gibberish from identifying with your persona, Jeff, right? So if it was gibberish, it would make it gibberish that it's not identifiable to you. Then, once you've done that, you delete your Facebook account such that the historical data that Facebook has about you has been invalidated, and therefore they cannot collect any data. However,
until Facebook tracks all the changes that you've made to those historical posts.
correct, Larry. In that
What
if
if-
they've
what if the
already
situation
shared, if they've already shared your Facebook data, it is too late. Also, modifying your Facebook feed in this way could violate Facebook terms of service.
Well, if you're deleting the account, who gives a fuck?
does
Facebook do backups?
There's very strict rules as to what you can do in the TOS for various social media accounts. In other words, I could be running this script, and midway, Facebook could say, "Well, that's a violation of our API terms of service. That's a violation of Facebook terms of service," and stop the script midway. And therefore, I do not recommend this as something that you should do. If you are that paranoid about privacy, you have either not created a Facebook account, or you have only shared what is already maybe public about you in other mediums on Facebook. I do not agree. There is a lot of stories this week that I would draw dotted lines to the Facebook debacle on so many fronts, about them sharing data with Cambridge Analytics, about YouTube allowing children to view inappropriate videos, about Microsoft enacting rules on Skype that says if you swear, which if we've done in this show, as our guests are coming on via Skype, Microsoft has said that if they don't monitor conversations, however, if someone complains, they can go back and say, you were acting inappropriately, therefore we're going to revoke your Skype accounts.
For some reason, I want to say the 7 words you can't say on television from George Carlin to both Keith and Jeff.
There are also many individuals and groups that have created Facebook videos that relate to firearms that have been threatened by Google to be taken down.
And Yahoo, YouTube, owned by Google. Has revoked all of these firearm videos.
I don't know if they've revoked all of them, but
not all of them, but is the ones they know about.
Have they? So have they actually taken down channels? I'm not sure.
I
know they're threatening to take down channels, and the what I've read, the articles have said that many firearm YouTube channels are moving all of their content to YouPorn.
Oh, what?
They are Pornhub. I'm sorry, Pornhub rather. It's Pornhub. They are moving their content to Pornhub that has a much more free and looser policy.
Fake news.
Wow.
No, this is true. There are firearms.
No, I believe it's true.
This is relevant to my interests.
I have talked about this on the show in the past. I just want to say that I have expressed concern about the Facebooks and the Googles and the Apples of the world and their ability to restrict content however they see fit.
Yep.
That effectively, in my opinion, violates the First Amendment rules for disseminating. They choose, the large companies have chosen to basically support certain types of content and poo-poo other types of content, which makes me think about... So hold on. Think about it in the science fiction TV show context. If you watch Dark Matter, which is the show I'm watching right now, which is a very fantastic show, I really like it, they talk about the corporations and the corporations' control over the universe. I think that's a metaphor for how the major corporations today can dictate content that's put on the internet.
Yep.
To me, that is very scary.
And I agree. And I will absolutely, I will yield the floor momentarily. I agree that if you want to put a video of you picking your nose on Facebook, and Facebook doesn't like nose picking videos, then they have every right to say, no, you can't put that here, because you know what? It's their property.
They already do that. If I want to take out an advertisement on Facebook that promotes my cigar blog, can't do that.
Can't do that because
rejected every time.
And
tobacco use, they're like, nope, you can't. They decide.
They also have some federal regulations that they have to.
No, the federal government has deemed tobacco legal for
right. But they also have some rules about advertisements, about where you can place that and who it's presented in front of.
They decide what those rules are.
No, the government does have rules on that. But
hey, I was trying to interject before.
Sorry, Jeff, go.
Keith.
Jeff, go.
So,
please, Jeff.
We're not really talking about security issues here. We're not even really talking about privacy issues here. We're talking about
free speech.
Yes, to some extent it's free speech, but it's also uncharted, unregulated territory. And I thought it was interesting that Paul, in his rant, mentioned Apple, because I've been getting all of this news on Facebook from the entertainment media this week. I haven't read anything, which is unusual because I'm a proponent of reading and not just watching stuff.
And unemployed.
The Apple CEO was interviewed in the last day or two, and basically, got on his high horse and said, we would never do something like that. We would never get into trouble like Facebook's in trouble. We would never do that kind of thing. I'm like, gosh, I know we've talked on this show several times about, and lumping them all together, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apple and all the data that they collect on all their users. And we seem to just, as long as it means we're going to get a coupon or a better deal, we're okay with it. So this is a societal, ethical issue. Yes, somewhat of a free speech issue.
In your defense, Jeff, Apple controls the majority share of podcasting today, including our own podcast.
Technically, and I want to say technically they invented it.
In their defense, being one of the major influencers in catapulting podcasting to be an industry in which we make our living. I mean, a lot of us benefit from it. I run this company and make our living on primarily podcasting. Apple has not infringed on our rights of free speech for doing our podcast. They have had the explicit tag. They have done some enforcement on that. Largely, Apple has said you can produce a podcast, you can say what you want, we are not going to limit your speech. Yes, you may have to tag that if it is explicit, and that's okay. They have not, from everything I've seen, following it very closely, they have not said, oh, we don't agree with the messages that you're sending on your podcast because you're talking about firearms in there, and we support more gun control, and therefore we're going to put. They have not done that.
Right.
They have not.
They've merely asked you to tag the data so that you can protect.
They very well could. I think that
certain sensibilities.
Google and Facebook have been a little more of the Gestapo on some of that content. Certainly. It's interesting. Other smaller organizations like Vimeo, for example, have not come down hard on any kind of content. But my concern is that they could.
They could.
And I agree with you, Jeff. I think Apple has been very good about supporting free speech for so many podcasts. And props to them. We've been on the Apple platform and so many podcasts have for so long, and they haven't done that. My fear is that a lot of other organizations, and not just major organizations like YouTube, which is supported by Google, obviously, or owned by Google, and Facebook. But if you look at some of the recent things that have been happening with gun control, the Walmarts, the Dick's Sporting Goods, and others have enacted rules based on some of the things that have been happening in the news today.
Sure, and it's their right to. There are companies that can do those things.
Right. But what happens when that translates into filtering content on the internet?
And quite honestly,
YouTube has followed suit and said, we're going to come down harder on folks that potentially are doing gun control. Microsoft has taken the same stance on Skype. They've actually said, if you're sending inappropriate pictures or swearing on Skype, if someone complains, we hold the right to pull your account from Skype.
And you know what? I don't dispute their right to be able to do that. And it's not about a matter of
it's their right to do that.
You can come into my house with your house with a bunch of kids, and you can walk into my house. I can be invited to my house, and you can start doing 4-letter Anglo-Saxon words up the wall. And you know what? I can tell you to leave because it's my house.
Right.
And that's...
But it's true.
It's their house, and quite honestly, you were invited to come to their house, and they could do that. And do I necessarily agree that I can't swear at YouTube's house? I may say, "Oh my God, freedom of speech," but you know what? It's their house. They make the rules. If I want to swear, I got to make my own. I can do it in my own damn house.
Right.
So
no, I agree with your point, Larry.
And that's really what it comes to. I may not like it.
I may not agree with it.
I may not like it. I may not agree with it. But you know what? I think it's given in this country. It's their right to be able to do so, especially for every penny we pay for some of those services.
It's true.
Especially in the spirit of the internet, it's the free market, right?
Yeah.
Like YouTube has the right to limit what they want to share, what they want to allow others to share. And if somebody goes to a Vimeo or somewhere else as a result of the limits of YouTube, that's the free market.
Yep.
It is the platform that they have built and run, and quite frankly, that they own the market share. And if people continue to use the market share, is in fact the free market.
Yep.
Because we have to think about the internet is global. It's not just the U.S.
This is not a new problem. Think about when I was doing XF metadata research, and people started posting adult content to Twitter, hosted at twitpic.com, which was the official Twitter picture sharing service at the time. TwitPic said no adult content, and so they banned all that stuff. So what happened? 3 services popped up that allowed you specifically to share adult content, including TwitSexy and a bunch of others.
So a couple comments, because we're finally getting around to the issue with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, which was not, technically it's filtering, but it's not censorship. It's not limiting access.
No,
it was using the data in a manipulative way.
It's sharing the data.
They're sharing the data, but
without
it's also
notification.
Using the data to try to influence opinions, and it, it's basically a form of deception. It's a form of what's the old term from World War II? Propaganda. Which I'm not making I find it interesting that a lot of the conversations focused immediately on freedom of speech issues, which I think betrays a leaning towards one side or the other from a political perspective. Just going to throw that out there. Even the statement that, and we've talked about this before, the idea that from this is okay from a free enterprise perspective. We talked about Apple months ago, and it basically came down to, well, they're doing it to make money. It's they have a right to do that. That seems to be more sacrosanct in our society at times, and maybe this is a political leaning, I'm not sure, rather than social issues, larger issues that we seem to care about, or we try to talk about in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of data privacy, in terms of whether you should be allowed to steal some or use people's data and all the data from all their friends and use it in such a way that's perhaps manipulative and starts to influence things like national elections, which is why we're talking about Facebook in the first place. I'm not trying to lean one side or another. I'm just trying to make observations of this is complicated, and we're scratching the surface of, I think, some deeper ethical, societal issues that we need to come to terms with, because the internet is still pretty damn new, and all this social media.
Doug White and I were talking, and I think that when we talk about this topic, I come back to Doug's comments, and he's like, look, anyone that reaches any particular individual in politics that reaches a certain level has a team that is going to try to market and influence social media to promote that candidate. And he's like, that's how it kind of escalates all the way up to Cambridge Analytics, in that if Facebook can share 50 million people with Cambridge Analytics, they can do the data and say, of those 50 million people. By the way, we think that 20 million people are maybe on the fence. They may vote for Trump. They might vote for Hillary. They're kind of not sure. They fit this profile because we've analyzed the data. And we think that these 20 million people you should hit with this messaging. And then they construct a messaging campaign to try and sway their vote. I think throughout time, that has always been a thing that the candidates do. I think today in social media, they're always trying to run a marketing campaign to try and promote a particular candidate. On the surface, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. However, sharing of data without notification of the people that own that data, Larry, myself, or the host on the show, if we subscribe to Facebook, if they said, hey, do I have your permission to share this data with a third party, we should have the decision to say yay or nay. The issue is the permission to share that data.
Right. And quite honestly, I think
that's an ethical issue, Paul, because there is no regulation.
Correct.
We think it's morally wrong to do things without permission, but there is no legal regulatory reason why they can't do it. Are they bending to societal pressures and economic pressures of losing customers, losing business, losing advertising opportunities? Yes, but it's not a legal regulatory issue today.
I think
actually, Jeff,
go ahead. I'll chime in afterwards.
I would say that there actually is legal concerns around this, which is terms of service or terms of use, which is if you, for the Cambridge Analytica story specifically, if you agree to take some of these quizzes that were taking place, you were agreeing to give up your own data as part of that, as part of agreeing to a terms of service to participate in those quizzes. The problem that exists around the Cambridge Analytica story is you were giving up data to all of your connectivity to your friends and connections, including things like direct messages and things of that nature, which you didn't really have the right to give up as an individual user in the first place. And that Cambridge Analytica could collect that from these quizzes is in fact the problem.
Yeah. So
I'm completely aware of that. Yes, you are correct, Keith, but it's still there's no legal precedence set yet. There's no case law, or it's hard to, and I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, but yes, that is the concern. And yes, we all intuitively think, well, that's wrong. They shouldn't be able to do that. But until there's some rule or regulation or some case law, and this might be very well the what happens with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, that they end up suffering some sort of consequence as a legal consequence specifically. But it hasn't happened yet.
So Paul's bored. He's moved to Twitter. So let's move it back to some security stories. I had some comments, but I'm going to reserve them because they're not important. So Paul, what else do you got for stories? I'm interested in specifically your story number 6, Russian APT compromised Cisco routers in energy sector attacks.
It was a theme this week in the news that a couple of stories,
and I think there's one big story that we need to cover for sure.
Number 6 and number 10 in wiki.securityweekly.com
for your section.
For my section, episode 553, that Russia, accused of a lot of different hacking, obviously Guccifer 2.0. was identified as a Russian intelligence officer. Also in the news this week, Russia has also been identified as basically attacking the U.S. power grid as well.
And again, we go back to the whole thing we've been saying for a long time. Attribution is hard. So just keep that in mind a little bit.
Attribution is hard. However, in the Guccifer story, when
please do enlighten me.
A social media company can point back an IP address to an attacker that ties back to Russian military intelligence, that kind of speaks to, and then also
again, I will argue that attribution is hard in that maybe that IP tied to that Russian intelligence was very subject to a similar attack like Atlanta.
Or
I'm just
maybe
saying.
On the U.S. power grid, I think as much as the political climate can be all over the place, right? I've noticed that over the past 5 years, maybe, we were pointing at China as attacking the U.S. Now we're very much pointing at Russia as attacking the U.S.
What's to say Russia didn't hack a bunch of stuff in China to attack the U.S. or
I
vice
think
versa?
but I find it very interesting that we will theorize that Russia very much supported Trump being in office. However, since Trump has been in office, we've attributed many of the attacks against the U.S. infrastructure
to Russia.
back to Russia. So,
What happened to China?
Politically, I don't know what's going on.
So I would say that the IC community has attributed them back, but the federal government, in terms of specifically the White House, has refused to actually acknowledge those attributions. So much so that both the Congress and the Senate have passed sanctions against Russia for those activities, and the White House has not enacted them.
This is very much a political issue.
Yep.
I think that at its core,
and ultimately, I think comes back to attribution is hard.
I think my theory, there are absolutely members of the Russian government that are out to attack the U.S., and that is happening. I think there's other political factors in play that are trying to downplay that level of hacking. The fact that there are 2 stories this week that I was able to identify that said basically Russians hacked the U.S. power grid probably means Russians are attacking us. I think there are so many underhanded tactics going on today in terms of what we would call 3 years ago cyber war going on today that we don't necessarily know what's going on. I think there may be certain members that are pledging their support and say, oh yeah, like America and Russia, like we're good. There are other factions that are like, no, we're not good. We're trying to take you guys out. I think the same way the U.S. is probably attacking Russian infrastructure and including other countries as well, maybe flying under the radar. Again, attribution is hard.
And
it's become so much of a political game that I don't know how much we're going to actually cover on the show in terms of who is hacking who.
I want to sum it up with this. If we're currently attributing attacks from Russia to the U.S., I would almost guarantee that China, South Africa, the Ukraine, you name it, are also attacking the U.S.
Sure.
But it's not a unilateral thing, is that the U.S. is hacking every one of them as well.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to throw that in there too. I mean,
this is it'd be foolish not to.
Yeah, this is an electronic 21st century version of the Cold War, where we have spies, they have spies, they catch us, we catch them, we find out that they've bugged some building or they've bugged this or that, and we bug things and they find it out, and it's largely I hate to use the term game, but it's a game in the sense of that this is how world politics work. It's largely economically based more and more these days. This is not about land grabbing and empire building as much as it is making sure you have a solid basis for economic sustainability.
Before we move on to Drupal,
Keith or Jeff, do you have stories you want to cover before we end?
Drupal. Before we move on to Drupal, I think that the whole big thing is that it's not about the Cold War about where you point your missiles. It's now about where you point your EPing. So, Drupal.
So, I do have one as well about the U.S. military specifically drafting hackers, but please, Larry, first cover Drupal.
No, I think that the drafting 40-year-old hackers is a good segue as long as we cover it quick.
Sure. So basically what has happened
because this is relevant to my
interest. Under discussion. But basically what the article actually states, so this is my article number 1 under the stories for the week. So the draft proposal to the Federal Register is that it would include any man, woman that would be of an in-demand skill set, regardless of age, which includes medical, dental, nursing, language, cybersecurity, and certain STEM occupations, to be drafted regardless of age or gender. At the end of the article, they make a kind of somewhat snide remark, which is the most alpha of all alphas could soon look to be curmudgeonly old bronies, plucked from the depths of 4chan, tasked with securing our nation from enemies both foreign and domestic.
I'm moving to Canada.
Quite frankly, the 40-plus old alphas of any kind are not bronies, in my opinion.
Maybe. Some of them might be, a select few, but still, the fact that the U.S. government is potentially looking to enlist and draft physically, but against your will, 40-plus-year-old computer hackers to secure national defenses, I'm moving to Canada. No.
I would actually say, so the irony here in this story is this. The systems under attack that are going to take place from foreign nationals or foreign nation states, for example, isn't going to be government infrastructure. It's going to be Amazon AWS. It's going to be Azure. It's going to be Microsoft's operating systems. It's going to be private industry that is going to be the attack surface, not the government.
Yep.
Which is foolish.
Either way.
So what you're saying is the government doesn't really know what they're doing.
I am taking myself and my underground bunker to Canada. Thank you very much.
Pretty much, Jeff. I think you've summarized it quite well.
Paul.
Thank you.
But
Well,
my
subtitle is sorry, Paul. It's the difference between cybersecurity and information security, which I had a conversation about last night at the DC hacker meetup called CapSec. Shout out to them. But there's a big difference between cybersecurity and information security, and because people can't define cybersecurity, it's hard to declare what the difference is. But I think you're illustrating it in that somebody had this great idea: let's recruit aging hackers to help us out.
I had to say that many people in the security field that may be recruited. Forced and recruited are two different things in this scenario, right?
Forced, drafted, and recruited are very different.
Very different.
And drafted is nearly to forced.
If you were asked to help your country improve their stance on cybersecurity in any capacity, there would be, I would hope, a larger majority that would say yes.
And it would depend on how that balance between me caring for my family or not, and providing for my family. But being drafted, in my opinion, is equal to forced. If you are, and that was the discussion, was that drafting 40-plus-year-old hackers.
I think
drafted is not a request for help. It is a demand. You will, or you will go to jail.
Right. Like forced is like Nazi Germany kind of style.
The Greatest Generation volunteered.
Right.
Even with the draft, even with the forcing, and the Greatest Generation volunteered, and that said, I have to consider, my God, my country, and my family, in not necessarily in that order.
And your home network, don't forget that.
Well, home network is my family. Home network is my family, and for me, my God. We won't talk about the religion thing. It's a non sequitur. And then we talk about in no specific order my country or my family, and I will choose one of those over the other any day of the week.
If you think about it too, as well, Larry, right? Like if you provide a vast majority of your household income, and suddenly you are drafted into this effort that may or may not be never ending, right? Like let's think about this from a perspective of quote unquote cyber war. Like that's never going to end. There's a pretty big difference there between I will support the government versus I will support myself and my family because I make a large sum of money comparative to my spouse or my partner because of what I do, right? Like that is, it's good that it's still up for discussion and not in fact a law.
I can't believe I'm actually admitting this publicly, but should I be called for military service as part of a draft to go do an honorable duty, just as many of the other fine folks have at a younger age, maybe with family or without, I would absolutely call that duty. But for me to become a hacker and potentially do that for a quote never-ending battle, as much as you admitted, Keith, I may consider my response reconsider my response. And I'm a patriot and I'm American, and I love what we stand for. The fact that Paul and I can argue about these various things is our inalienable right, and we can still remain friends through all of it. And have been for 15 years, even though we may disagree on various topics, and that's the point. But I may consider my my thing different. And you know what? Tomorrow I will think about this and go, well, that was really dumb. I'd really do this.
I think that there are budgetary considerations that needs to come into play. That if the U.S. federal government requires resources, they could make available funds to compensate people, to help them in their mission to provide national security in this event. I think there are other situations where, you're graduating high school and you want to enroll in a military program and become part of a program that helps in a cyber capacity defend us. Those programs can coexist in a very nice fashion, as we have proven, I think, as a track record here in the U.S. Like, if the government wants your help, you could pledge that I want to be that. That's my career in the military. You could also pledge that, yes, on a contract basis, if you want to compensate me, I could also help. I think there are circumstances that would deem both of those
if you want to draft me on a 1099 basis, I'd consider it.
And again, there are reasonable measures to make that happen in both circumstances, and I think there are a lot of our friends that we work with in the security community would be like, yes, I get paid by the U.S. government to help further our mission and reinforce our values and standards as a country. I think there are others that I've seen come up through the ranks that say, hey, I was graduating, I pledged my military service, I want to do good for my country, and it was part of my duty. I also was compensated for that. Maybe they paid for my education.
Sure.
There was some kind of compensation.
There's lots of variables.
It all can work out.
There's lots of variables.
There's no... I don't think
my initial knee-jerk reaction is, fuck no! But it all remains to be seen.
I would say this in closing. I have a number of family members and close friends who are part of the armed services for our country, and I'm very grateful for their service.
Agreed.
But I would say this is the government might be better served by partnering with industry at the time where the industry is probably, whether it's Amazon AWS or Azure or Microsoft in some capacity, that is probably the target or the attack vector through which these attacks take place. Partnering with them through something like US CERT is probably better served than trying to recruit ad hoc people, because adding more chefs to the kitchen is not necessarily going to make the recipe any better. So to that end, I think there are probably better ways to solve
Keith,
the
to your point, there's no absolute, right? There are organizations and people the government will contract with to help further their cybersecurity programs. There are individuals that I'm very thankful for that pledge their service to our country, that you may put a rifle in their hand, you may have them be part of Army Corps of Engineers, that you may put in cybersecurity, that work in that capacity for a limited period of time, for a career, that as long as everyone's on the same page about the mission and the contract, it's totally okay, and I'm okay. I'm very friendly with so many people that protect our country today in various capacities. You can't put any kind of silos around these things and say one's better than the other. We all work to support the country, and I'll leave it at that. What is the story that we want to end with? Because
I think draft and cooperation is a different story.
Yeah, like forcing people and certainly having programs that people can work with the government in various capacities are two totally different things.
Draft and partnership.
What we're saying is there should be a choice, and we're very thankful for all of people who work with our government in so many different capacities to protect our country, whether that's cyber, whether that's tactical, whatever it may be. We're thankful for that, and the point is there are options.
Yes,
we don't want to see a point where
we don't want to have options.
Like people are forced to do something beyond their will,
and we understand those folks that sacrificed that weren't given options.
Thanks for bringing that up, Larry, because I am getting all sorts of privilege out of a lot of this conversation. That well, I'm not going to do it if I don't get paid enough. I can't make that that sacrifice. I mean, there's more socioeconomic underlying cultural issues at play here. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, very well.
Thank you
put,
for
Jeff.
my CS and gender white male.
Well said.
Yes.
The story that I want to end on this episode is one I wanted to.
Please tell me it's Drupal.
It is not Drupal. Like, don't run.
Can I hit Drupal real quick? 30 seconds.
Don't run Drupal.
Drupal. Don't run Drupal.
We're already in trouble with our wives. Go for it.
Yeah, don't run Drupal. Out of support patches, 9% of all the CMEs based on some statistics are running Drupal. Critical high vulnerability for remote code execution. Go patch your shit now. Stop listening to the show. If you run Drupal, go patch it. If you don't know if you run Drupal, go find out.
Blah, blah, blah. Drupal.
Done.
My talk at Source largely is going to be about Docker. There are certain one decision in particular. It revolves around WordPress.
Replace Docker. Replace Drupal rather. Right.
Yeah.
So
here's the thing. Listen to my conversation with Rob Shane about my talk. Listen to my talk, but also understand that so many different choices for CMS, so many different ways to do that. I've looked into trying to replicate WordPress in very much a DevOps environment that we've talked about. I found a great alternative that I think provides everything you need. I've done from probably 6 hours of me playing with it has really impressed me. That's WP Engine. Fantastic environment. So your CMS choices can certainly be all over the map in terms of security levels. WordPress not being potentially the best choice. However, it's all about how you implement that.
Right. And
Drupal could be good for you, but if you have a facility to provide integrity, provide continuous development in DevOps in a Drupal environment, great.
Or DevSecOps, depending, right?
Sure.
Right.
I just, but we've talked about so many shows in the past, Larry, about how Drupal and WordPress and
they all suck.
God forbid Cold Fusion, right?
Oh, they all suck.
Oh, they all suck. And it's about having the best process.
But that said, I think one of the other things is that how many times do you have WordPress, Drupal, Cold Fusion in your environment and you don't know about it?
Oh,
segueing into your next story, Paul.
Holy shit! Successful pen test that stemmed from. Oh, we had WordPress. Let him in. Let's bring Apollo onto the show.
This is going to turn into another hour-long show. I'm going to need the drink.
Let's do it. So just really quick while we get Apollo on the line, staying on top of vulnerabilities you didn't know about. What's a resounding endorsement for the Source conferences? Josh Corman last year gave the keynote, one of the keynotes for Source Boston, and Josh talked about how our purview into CVE is only a portion of the picture, how we try to catalog vulnerabilities across all of our software applications, and that we maybe get 80% of it, maybe 70, maybe 60% of it, that there are so many vulnerabilities out there that we don't know about, which is why this article resonated with me, because spending a lot of time in this area about vulnerabilities, working for Tenable, analyzing a lot of the vulnerability scanning solutions out there today, I was like, there are maybe, I think it's 80,000 CVEs today, and that's only a certain percentage of vulnerabilities that exist today.
The reported vulnerabilities that exist today.
Right.
The sky is falling. The sky is falling.
No, the sky is
too many
vulnerabilities. This is your story number 7, correct, Paul?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. I wanted to make sure for our listeners, so when they go back and look at the show notes,
story number 7. Everything that has been documented in CVE as a vulnerability is only a percentage, maybe 60 or 70% of what's out there today, and that's something that so many people may not.
Which is
realize.
Also a subset of what you realize is actually on your network, internet facing or otherwise.
And
which is also why I have suggested, I don't know if I've done it on the air or not, but in terms of the risk equation where vulnerability is one of the variables, I propose that you consider it a constant. And let's move on. How else do we address security?
Apollo?
He was there, and we lost
Wait,
him.
is he there?
I see him on Skype.
Apollo.
I heard the drop noise.
Because he has some very good recommendations about DevOps and DevSecOps.
Oh yeah, that's
And
what Apollo
Agile.
does.
And
Should we say
Agile.
should we say a Marco and he can say Apollo?
Marco?
Because
Because I know once Apollo's here, this is going to go on for a while.
But could.
We might need to.
I can't hear Apollo though. I don't know if we've got him on the
Maybe
show.
we need to invite him back for
a follow-on segment.
But if we
honestly,
could get him
Paul-
now.
since it's like almost midnight.
What?
I would say this: if we can't get him on tonight's show, we should absolutely get him on at least Application Security Weekly to talk about some of the DevOps versus the DevSecOps and so forth as well.
And Larry, you said you read the Phoenix Project.
Yes.
Now,
I read that.
And the goal. And the goal. What order did you read them in?
The goal, then the Phoenix Project.
So you listened to Gene's advice, which I didn't.
Even better, I read the Phoenix Project from Gene Kim, handed to me in paperback copy, pre-release, unedited.
Wow.
So that's how early I read it.
First, and then read the goal.
No, I read the goal first.
You did. Okay.
By Ilya
Goldrat.
Yes. So that was.
It's interesting. We're 5 years out from the Phoenix Project.
Yes.
Gene Kim and John Willis have done an interview series.
Yes.
In that interview series that they've released as a follow-up, because I was like, why did they do that? And they were like, well, Goldrat released the goal, and then they released Beyond the Goal as an interview series.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, so you're mirroring, but I get it.
And
it's an homage. It's an homage, not a copyright violation.
No, and
so awesome. But what Gene says in Beyond the Phoenix Project, which many probably have not read up until this point, because it was just released really a couple of weeks ago. What Gene said in Beyond the Phoenix Project is, John Willis asked him, "Did you meet Goldrat?" And he's like, "We actually did an hour-and-a-half conference call with Goldrat." And I'm like, holy shit! Like, what happened?
Oh my god!
And Gene's like, it was one of the most prolific experiences in the whole writing of the Phoenix Project. Is that he's like, we got to talk to Goldrat for Dr. Goldrat for an hour and a half, and the way that he asked questions of us and interacted was consistent with
what
his
he did
writings.
in the book.
It was very much like the Oracle, or what I deem the Kung Fu Master. Kind of the way he asked questions. He said it was very, very humbling, and he's like, it's one of those experiences that I'm so glad I had, because he passed away, and he's like, I got to meet with him and talk with him upon request and talk about that. So I thought that was one of the kind of the behind the scenes that was really prolific for me to hear that. When Gene and company wrote the book, they didn't just do it on a whim. They really immersed themselves
into the goal.
A lot of other literature works and research, and not just the book The Goal, but other research projects that Goldrat and others had embarked upon, and immersed themselves in that culture. They went to conferences that were very specific to lean manufacturing. They went to conferences that were all about managing constraints.
Yes.
And I'm like, holy crap.
So that was,
it really made sense as to how well put together the book The Phoenix Project was
So
the research they went
that was
through.
a really interesting time in my life, in that I was moving into management in healthcare, and I left there many years ago. And it was very much that there was very much a push to go on to the ITIL framework. And as part of that, we were holding weekly 2-week meetings to get our ITIL certifications, and some of us got ITIL certified. And then we were also working on lean certification as well. And I was thinking about it at the time, and I'm like, this is fucking useless. And thinking back on that, and some of the things that they actually asked us to do were unbelievably fascinating, and it's still fascinating to me this day. Like, one of the ones that we had to do was some of our material for the whole thing was go read Shackleton's Way. about Ernest Shackleton and the expedition to the Arctic. And I'm like, why do I care about this for idle? And believe it or not, I thought the story was, outside of the fact that it was a management thing and quote DevOps related, the story itself was fascinating, and I've read 3 other books on Shackleton since then.
Sure.
And was and was amazing. And then one of them was The Goal, and I'm like, this sounds like Who Moved My Fucking Cheese?
Exactly.
And
yes.
and
Hey, Apollo is here.
And
Apollo.
I read it.
Hold on. Everyone stop.
Yeah.
Apollo, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh,
Yes.
Apollo, it's so nice to talk with you. We're just talking about how I just finished the Phoenix project and have embarked on
Welcome to 5 years ago.
listening to listening to the follow-on with Gene Kim and John Willis called Beyond the Phoenix Project, talking with Gene Kim's and company to bring him back on the show to talk about the follow-on works to the Phoenix Project, how 5 years later I think I really start to apply that. Like, I wasn't ready 5 years ago to really digest what was being written in the Phoenix Project, what was written in The Goal, having my own company, developing our own software, and realizing how much like enlightenment is to be had with listening to this. So Apollo,
for the record, Beyond the Phoenix Project is available on Audible.
yes, as of like a week ago. Yes, very new.
Release
so
date
Apollo,
3/8/18.
welcome.
And I'm adding to my cart and downloading now.
Thoughts, opinions on our current
Dilemma.
conversation.
Oh.
Yeah, you're on
You're all
deck, man.
fucked.
Does this make Apollo the first call-in guest, like randomly on the show?
In a while. Yes.
So, I would say.
So say something deep and meaningful, Apollo.
Deep and meaningful.
Development methodologies don't come easily. They do not come quickly. You have to understand the complexities of the layers of IT control. What can we change? And how can we help build them up to become better and have better levels of integration?
That was deep.
That's deep.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And man of few words. We want more words, man. Good God, you need another drink.
All right. So
He was drinking and he was just watching.
He was.
Yeah, I think he was probably just tipping the bottle up for crying out loud, because I don't blame him.
I thought Keith was wasted.
Close as compared
Remy
to Apollo at this point.
Martin.
I think I've got to wrap it.
I thought I was wasted drinking martinis.
Oh shit! And I'm gonna go get another drink right now. So
Apollo apparently drank us all under the table.
Probably are talks
watching-
about Wi-Fi versus
watching
Ethernet
you
connectivity and
assholes.
networking.
Apollo, I will
somebody
apologize.
take
I'm going to
us
step
out.
away and get some more to drink because, sir,
We
I
need to
want to hear
catch
what you
up.
have,
Yeah.
and it's brilliant because I know it's going to be
All right,
brilliant.
hold on, Apollo. I'm going to back up. I'm going to ask you some different questions. I've just finished the Phoenix project. Apollo, who is your favorite character from the Phoenix project and why?
I mean, the author too, because he just has to deal with so much goddamn bullshit. But the thing is, that's the bullshit we all have to deal with. It never goes away. We are never, beyond that. Just we are that man. Every goddamn day we wake up.
Wait, so
And-
you're talking about Bill?
Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. No, the problem is
The narrator.
we're always
Yep,
Bill.
Bill.
We're Bill every day, and the entire book is around Bill. But it's just like we have to find something that can extend beyond us, that doesn't involve just us as a singular human being, but involves other people to help us succeed. And that's really effing hard.
Now, Apollo, who is your least favorite character in the Phoenix project?
Jake.
Who is Jake? Now, I thought I was teeing you up to say Sarah, because Keith and I talked about Sarah and how we all hate Sarah. Who is Jake?
I would say that Paul, honestly, before Apollo answers, everybody needs the character Sarah in their lives to be able to achieve the goals they need to achieve. If you do training with, weight training or resistance training, it gets you further along the way. So everyone at some point needs the Sarah in their career as a hurdle to overcome.
Sarah's kind of like that ex-girlfriend that everyone hates.
No. Sarah is a woman that we need to prove ourselves that we are worthy. That's it.
I
would agree.
I agree with that, actually. Wow. Well, then.
I'm almost tempted to read this book now. Not quite, but almost.
Okay.
Oh my God! Officially jumped the shark. I'll just say that.
Please.
We should all become better.
Homework.
Can I take us out?
Yes, Keith. Please take us out.
Over and are we out yet? Out?
Out.
You're real dirt there.